Question 1. What is self? What is soul or Atman and Jeevatma? What is the basic difference among self, soul and Jeevatma? Why is there a lot of ambiguity in the literature on the use of these terms? Answer. Self is a force which carries out every function in a human life. Self is one's own egoism. Without self nothing can be done. Self seems to be uplifted when an individual gains. Self is only hurt under miserable conditions. Self drives us. Self is present in all individuals. Without self no activity can be carried out. One praises self and one blames self under different conditions. The self is an omnipotent force. Self is God within us. Then why does a human being do a wrong and shameful act? When self is God within us, and it is assumed and perceived that the God, the same self, exists in each one of us. If a good thing is done, one appreciates what the Almighty has done, and also, if one does wrong, still the Almighty, the Self, is blamed. How the Self, the part and parcel of the omnipresent, omnipotent force, does a wrong act? He cares for all the living beings, then why the Self, the God, within us is to be blamed? There is some dilemma in this complex understanding. And this needs to be deeply understood and appreciated. For example, as petrol or gasoline is the same to drive each automobile irrespective of its make, shape and size, similarly each human being is governed and managed by the same self irrespective of his name and form. As without gasoline, no vehicle can run, so no human being can survive without self. If gasoline or petrol makes a vehicle run and meets with the accident, shall the gas or petrol be blamed or the vehicle is to be blamed? Nobody blames either petrol and nor the vehicle. Only the driver is blamed in all these happenings or conditions. Similarly, the self does every activity, like gas or petrol in the vehicles to drive, to act, but still like petrol, the self is not responsible. By our wrong perception, our ignorance makes us self-responsible for all our good and bad acts, particularly the bad or wrong acts. We say or admit the self does every activity, and without self, nothing can be done. Because he, the self, is the part or replica of God in us, and he is the driving force behind every activity. It is true that he or self does everything, but the dilemma is that he or self does nothing. He, the self, is just the blind and powerful force of Almighty in us. Without him nothing is undoubtedly possible, but for every act of ours, he, the Self or Almighty, is not responsible. What a strange paradox! He or self does every activity but does not take the responsibility of any of his acts. It means there is some other linkage through whom the self and human egoism works. That linkage needs to be perceived and purified to perform the best acts by the self, since self as a free will, it can adopt any path, right or wrong. There is some other force that guides it or the work of self. As petrol drives the vehicle, but does not show the direction. So, it is just the doer, but a force that does all the activities of the human being is guided by another mysterious force. Jeevatma in the human being drives the self. It is the human's pure and mixed soul, so all the right and wrong activities are carried out by the direction and instructions of Atman, but by the force of self, which's the part or replica of the Almighty. Subtly, it is rather very complex and difficult to conceive. To have a very clear picture is beyond discussions, logics and apprehension at times. Psychologically, human senses, that is eyes, nose, tongue, skin, ear, are closely interrelated with the mind and intellect. And they all influence the jiva or living being, or in other words, Jeevatma or soul of the living being, and all the horizontal and vertical activities are carried out as if Atman, the soul, as the self, which is the image or part of Almighty in us, is executing, because that is the only executive force in us, similar to gas or petrol in the automobiles. This is perceived since after death all the senses are intact, and which leaves the body or human form is self or Atman or soul. Although the pure self is not the doer or executor, but it is considered to be the basically doer or executor of all the activities. In general, senses influence the mind. Based on the whim and fancy of the powerful mind, Jeevatma, and the mixed self, with pure and impure virtues, positioned at Dhahara Chakra located at the heart center, acts. However, intellect being more subtle and nearer to mind can control or govern the mind to some extent. Atman or soul, the pure self, a pure divine light, is not able to effect and convince the mutative mind, which is always under the strong influence of powerful Maya illusion. So, basically human life under the influence of strong mutative mind revolves around senses in the horizontal plane, and human egoism is developed to such a high order that a human considers that self, mixed self, is his egoistic power, and through this egoism, his activities are governed till the time his egoism is hurt by the impact of egoism of others. This leads to fight, quarrels, and execution of wrong deeds without any basis of understanding, and finally, the self is blamed as if self, the Almighty, is responsible for all such substandard and inhuman activities under the influence of greediness, desires, anger, sex and so on. It looks Maya, the most powerful force, is getting done all such acts by the self, through the self. It is all Maya since Maya is considered as Brahma. As if self, the God, is responsible for all this. Basically, Jeevatma under the influence of Maya is the doer and responsible for all executions. Now the bottom line is that the senses must be controlled by the mind. The mind must be made strong, greater and finally the greatest to control the senses. Preachings or instructions of Lord Krishna are to be followed as per the 3rd chapter of Gita. Desires must be sublimated, since man minus desire is God. By overcoming the desires, by control of senses, by the self-restraint and by practice of yoga, and by the grace of Guru and Mahavatar Babaji, the vasanas are purified, thus, the mind is controlled. Intellect becomes sharp, and thus with all this jiva or living being is uplifted by its purity. By ascending the life force through the heart center, the Atman, the soul, and the Jeevatma reaches the Ajna Chakra. Here the Jiva gets separated from Jeevatma. The pure Atman or soul stays at the Ajna Chakra. The pure Atman is self without egoism, desires, vasanas and inclination of the senses. This or pure soul transforms into the divine light by years of spiritual practice and mind gets dissolved into the soul, the self, that ascends up to apex center and merges with supernal. The soul, pure Atman, that is the self at the Ajna Chakra under the influence of pure mind and intellect does only good activities. Such activities done by human beings are divine and are without the tint of selfishness. At Ajna Chakra soul is a pure self. At Dhahara, the soul or Atman is Jeevatma. Activities carried out by Jeevatma being at Dhahara Chakra are not the pure activities done by the self. Jeevatma in its pure state becomes self only at Ajna Chakra and not at the lower chakras. Jeevatma is wrongly termed as self and considered like an almighty carrying out right and wrong activities. These are basically done by Jeevatma under the influence of distorted impure mind and senses and not by the self. Self is God, pure soul. It cannot be directed by an impure mind since when it becomes pure then only the soul ascends to Ajna to Sasara by getting transformed into divine light and not before that by any other means. So self, the pure soul, the part or image of Almighty is to be worshipped. The misinterpretation of self in the literature has caused different confusions and discussions on this subject. Basically, It is Jeevatma that is responsible for all mixed activities and not the self, which is a part of Almighty.